was raised that Joe will talk about NATO and North, global North, and I will be talking about NATO and global South. However, I decided to consider United States as part of global South and talk about what's going on with NATO here and in the movement. I would like to shift gear instead of going into details of what NATO is all about and what it is doing. I want to get into the question of why is NATO doing what it is doing. And I think for us in the peace movement is the more important part, because we all of us more or less have seen what they have been doing. The question is what is driving them. And our view in the Peace Council has been for a long time that NATO is an imperialistic tool of Western powers. And it cannot be just looked at as an independent force in itself, but as a part and parcel of one single imperialist agenda for the 21st century. This is what we have been doing, trying to relay to people from the Peace Council side, and unfortunately we have not been very successful so far to get the people to see the relationship between the NATO as an institution, organization, military creature, and the masters that are running it. And in our view, our failure, in a sense, partly is due to what we believe to be the legacy of the Cold War period. That for 70, 80, 90 years, people have been brought up to think in terms of a reductionist thing, in terms of good guys, bad guys. We are the good guys and the communists are the bad guys, and there's nothing in between, and there's no gray area. And this mentality is being presently promoted also by NATO in terms of whatever they're doing around the world. So every time you look at some action on the part of NATO or the US, military intervention, coup d'etat, anything else, you find another bad guy discovered somewhere. And that guy becomes the reason for aggression and war and invasion. We have witnessed this left and right since the collapse of Soviet Union, especially because now, before it was just labeling communists was enough. Right? But now they have to come up with new terms: terrorist, dictator, violator of human rights, violator of women's rights, as in Afghanistan they were talking about Taliban and other things. So they find some label to stick to some of these leaders or leaderships and justify aggression. The reason I'm saying it's the Cold War mentality is because we still haven't come out of the image that has been created in our minds about Eastern Bloc and the Communist Socialist Bloc, and we are still thinking in those terms. But we have gone far beyond that at this stage. Look at the bad guys that each time we have been presented that has led us to be silent in the face of an aggression, or semi-silent, or hesitant. Look at Yugoslavia with Milosevic. Look at Panama with Noriega. Look at Afghanistan with Taliban. Look at Iran and the Ayatollah. Look at Iraq and Saddam Hussein. Look at Libya and Gaddafi. Look at Syria and Assad, Venezuela, Chavez, and now Maduro. Look at Ukraine, Yanukovych, Russia, Putin. And they are creating a new one every day. Wherever they want to go, this happens. And this usually pushes the peace movement, anti-war movement, to hesitate in opposing these aggressions because they are afraid to be identified with these bad guys. They equate in our minds our opposition to aggression with support for some bad guy. And us, being fearful of that label, withdraw, usually, or are hesitant in our opposition. That has been a serious weakness in the peace movement today, in our view. The question is not whether these guys are good or bad, right? It's irrelevant. Who is bad guy and who is good guy? The definition of good guy, bad guy from our point of view, from peace movement point of view, from people's point of view, is different from the definition of bad guy from the imperialist point of view. Okay, when they say bad guy, we think dictatorship, violation of human rights, oppression, violence, other things. When they look at bad guys, they are always the ones who are standing in the way of imperialist plans. That they are immediately becoming bad guys. Okay, so in that sense, they sell us one kind of definition of bad guy and act on a different definition of the bad guy. And we get confused in the middle and hesitate in our position. Look at the example. How many of us really oppose the attack on Libya? How many of us are really opposing, actively opposing now what's going on in Syria? Not all of us, definitely, right? And if there are people who are very active in support of Venezuela, but do nothing with regards to some other place, because they don't see the link that these actions are all part and parcel of the same singular imperialist strategy. And in fact, it has been outlined openly, and we have been disregarding it. There is another reason why they're pushing this good guy, bad guy image. And that's because they can find exactly to mask the relationship between the attack on Libya and what's going on in Ukraine as element of the same strategy. They want to provide an image or produce an image that each case is separate. We are doing this because of that particular bad guy for that particular reason, and not for a global strategy that we have behind the whole thing. Okay, so this good guy, bad guy mentality also serves as masking this unified imperialist strategy by pushing us in different directions, finding different reasons for different attacks and aggressions, not being able to link them together because Assad is different from Gaddafi, is different from somebody else, right? So as a result, we see it as separate issues rather than the single issue that is going on. Okay, so irrelevant, but important in terms of shaping our reactions. And we have to come out of that mentality. So for peace movement at this stage to really not be effective against NATO, but other manifestations of imperialist aggression, and militarism is not the only method and tool in the hands of imperialism. Finance capital operates behind the scenes in every way. We know that. They are killing people, as many people. Imperialism has killed more people in peacetime than wartime. We have to understand that. Through poverty, sickness, right? Homelessness, environmental pollution, wars, environmental impacts of wars. So the question is, we have to oppose, as a peace movement, the imperialist agenda in its totality, rather than just looking at Syria at one time, opposing that part, looking at Yugoslavia, looking at Gaddafi at another point, and just fighting it in piecemeal. We have to understand, once we see this coherent plan, we will be able to be proactive and not reactive. Not wait until they attack Libya, then we respond. When they're setting the stage for it, if you see the plan, and you will see these are steps towards this part of this plan, you would be able to be proactive about it. Take preventive action, right? Rather than wait until it happens. And we have been reactive just because we're not looking at the whole picture, and we are being led, especially by imperialist media, in terms of what the top issue is today, rather than us knowing it from the imperialist agenda, what is the top issue today. Look at what's going on right now with Pivot to Asia, right? They're doing it piecemeal. They don't make it with a big bang so everybody knows, right? Aren't they talking about, wasn't Obama talking about dispatching more NATO forces towards China and the East? Is anybody objecting? Is anybody on the streets? No, because we see it as a small piece of action, right? Not related to anything else. Just an act, a policy. But if you put it in that overall picture of NATO and imperialism, then you will see that this is a step towards another war that may come. The same thing that is happening on the borders of Russia. Okay, so once we have that general plan and strategy of imperialism led by the United States, we can then go beyond the appearances of things and go into the core causes of things and try to prevent future aggressions rather than responding to it after the fact. Okay, and if you are kind of not sure what this imperialist plan is, I would like to go read a few pieces of the document. Probably some of you are familiar with, and I've been accused of relying on it too much. But if you look at this document, if you haven't, you will see that every step that NATO, US, Western allies are taking in every corner of the world is to the letter of this document, as it was proposed in around 2000 by Project for the New American Century, Neocons institution. And the document was called Rebuilding America's Defenses Strategy, Forces, and Resources for a New Century. And indeed, these are forces built up for new century. I'll go to some of these items, very brief. It's a 90-page document, a lot of it technical, but within it you will see the principles that are being set up. I go in a kind of I have reshuffled them to make sense out of the whole thing. And these are all quotes. The United States must shape a new century favorable to American interests. At present, the United States faces no global rival. There are, however, potentially powerful states dissatisfied with the current situation and eager to change it. Change U.S. domination, monopoly. Our defense strategy must be maintaining U.S. preeminence, precluding the rise of a great power rival, and shaping the international security order in line with the American principles and interests. Think about pivot to Asia with regard to China and NATO moving to the borders of Russia, right? Great power rivals emerging. You don't want them. Today, the military's task is to expand the zones of democratic peace, quote unquote, to deter the rise or a new great power competitor. The Balkans and Southeastern Europe more generally present the major hurdle towards the creation of a Europe whole and free. From the Baltic to the Black Sea, the delay in bringing security and stability to Southeastern Europe has prevented the consolidation of the victory in the Cold War. This is especially important in light of the nascent European moves towards an independent defense identity and policy. It is important that NATO not be replaced by the European Union, leaving the United States without a voice in European security affairs. These are, you see what's happening right now with NATO, right? The prospect in East Asia will be an increasingly important region marked by the rise of Chinese power. Raising U.S. military strength in East Asia is the key to coping with the rise of China to great power status. It is now commonly understood that there are forces that may threaten America's ability to exercise its dominant military power. Potential rivals such as China are anxious to exploit the situation, while Adversaries like Iran, Iraq, North Korea are rushing to develop ballistic missiles and nuclear weapons, listen to this part, as a deterrent to American intervention, right, in the region. If an American peace is to be maintained, American peace, and expanded, it must have a secure foundation on unquestioned U.S. military preeminence. While withdrawing from the Balkans with peace would place American leadership in Europe, indeed, the viability of NATO in question. Further, these constabulary missions, you're talking advanced bases, demand American political leadership rather than that of the United Nations, meaning NATO should replace UN. Okay. I have two more to read. It's going to be quick. When their missiles are tipped with warheads, even weak regional powers have a credible deterrent again, regardless of the balance of conventional forces. A number of regimes deeply hostile to America, meaning imperialism, North Korea, Iran, Iraq, Libya, Syria, one by one they're going through them, pose a grave challenge to the American peace and military power. The ability to control this emerging threat through traditional non-proliferation treaties is limited. Forget NPT, right? Let's move on. Let's take the matters into our own hands, right? We cannot allow North Korea, Iran, Iraq, or similar states to undermine American leadership. And finally, the concluding part of this that was famously read and put up everywhere, and most importantly, none of this can be done absent some catastrophic catalyzing event like Pearl Harbor, right? So the whole plan is outlined here. They're not disguising anything. Compare that with what Jackie read from the NATO side, how they are presenting themselves publicly, and what the actual driving force is. And this is what we're dealing with. Our struggle against war should be our struggle against imperialism. No other way can do it. Thank you.